So welcome everybody. Hyvää päivää kaikille kuuntelijoille ympäri maailmaa. Tervetuloa Finlandia Foundation Nationalin puolesta meidän Finnposium-tapahtumaan. On hienoa, että olette kaikki tässä keskustelussa. God dag till alla lyssnare runt om i världen. På uppdrag av Finlandia Foundation National, välkomna till vår Finnposium. Det är fantastiskt att ha er alla här för denna diskussion. Greetings to all of our listeners from around the world. And welcome to our Finnposium event in conversation with one of our most recently featured Finnish-American artists, Heather Hietala. My name is Tommy Flanagan. I'm the executive director of Finlandia Foundation National. Our Finnposium event and In Conversation series offers a platform for Finns, Finnish-Americans, and friends to highlight interesting and important topics from around Finnish America and Finland. From film discussions and historical topics to culinary excursions and exclusive interviews like today's, Finnposium always offers a chance to learn something new. We're thrilled to see so many returning viewers today, and we're also excited to have many new people joining us who may be completely new to Finlandia Foundation. So we thought it would be a good idea to explain a little bit about who we are. We are a Finnish-American cultural nonprofit organization that has been around for over 70 years. We have members across the country, and we are made up of nearly 60 local affiliated chapters from Seattle, Washington to Canterbury, Connecticut, San Diego, California to Hancock, and Colorado to Florida. We pride ourselves on being, quote, the most important independent source of support for Finland in America. And what does that mean? Well, it means many things. We run annual programs such as Performer of the Year, Lecturer of the Year, and Artist of the Year to highlight Finnish and Finnish Americans in these areas who are doing great work. In fact, we strive to highlight that Finnish connection wherever it can be found in America. For example, in recent years, we have sponsored a National Sauna Week, a series of online and local in-person events to bring awareness to the traditional Finnish sauna and all of its related cultural, social, and health benefits. But at the heart of what we do is a robust grants and scholarships program. This year, for example, we had a record number of applicants to both programs. And we have a dedicated board of trustees from across the country made up of Finns and Finnish Americans who run these programs and strive to connect across the country. Additionally, we strive to maintain contemporary cultural and social connections to Finland. Recently, for example, we just signed a memorandum of understanding with Fulbright Finland Foundation to increase cooperation in supporting Finnish-American exchange. In 2023, Finlandia Foundation purchased the Finnish-American Heritage Center in Hancock, Michigan. This included Northwind Books, the Finnish-American Folk School, Historical Archive, and Finlandia Art Gallery. With that, I hope you have a better sense of what the foundation does. I'm very thrilled that Finlandia Foundation has Heather Hietala in our circle, and I'm so thrilled personally to have met her. We just had her in Hancock at the Finlandia Art Gallery when we were there for our board meetings, and we're glad to have Carrie to take it over to introduce Heather today, returning to my Finnish-American roots.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Carrie Vander Veen, and I'm the gallery director of Finlandia Art Gallery, and I invited Heather to have an exhibit at our gallery, which took place this spring. So I want to introduce Heather, and then she'll give us a brief slideshow of her work, and then we'll do some question answer between her and I. And then at the very end, please feel free to put some questions in the chat so that we can answer your questions. So Heather is a Finnish-American artist from Asheville, North Carolina. She's an artist and educator who exhibits and teaches workshops across the country and internationally. She authored the book Weaving Contemporary Rag Rugs, which explores the history of the rag rug and contemporary applications of the technique, as well as acknowledging that rag weaving is a world tradition built of necessity and shaped by creativity. She dedicated her book to her Finnish grandmother. Heather grew up in rural New Hampshire at the end of a half-mile dirt road in the foothills of the White Mountains, and her experiences growing up so close to nature and the cyclical nature of the seasons significantly significantly influenced her life and her work. She studied painting and sculpture at the University of New Hampshire and textiles at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. She furthered her studies at the leading craft schools, the Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina, Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in Maine, and the Arrowmont School of Arts and Crafts in Tennessee. Her path through her education introduced her to many techniques and artistic practices, which she later integrated into a mature style unique in its innovative use of media and combination of materials. Heather's work has been exhibited both nationally and internationally, and she has taught and lectured throughout the United States, Canada, Japan, Nepal, and Thailand. She's published numerous articles on textiles, textile artists, and creative journaling. Her work is in numerous public and private collections, including the Racine Art Museum, the Asheville Art Museum, the Gregg Museum of Art and Design, among others. Her work is represented by Momentum Gallery in Asheville. She just had a solo show there very recently, and the Oino Gallery in Bloomfield, Ontario. She received a National Endowment for the Arts Regional Fellowship and a Tennessee Arts Commission Fellowship and 2 residencies at the Centrum Center of Arts in Washington State. So please welcome Heather, and it'll be an interesting conversation. Thanks, Heather.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hello to everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Tommy and Finlandia Foundation National for inviting me, and to Carrie and all the organization of the exhibit and everything that went on up at in Houghton this spring and this Finnposium right now. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to share my work and my ideas. And this is a slightly different perspective because I'm thinking about more where some of who I am might have come from. We're a mix of all these different people, and I am a mix of who I am, the influences and the experience I've had. And so first of all, we all change over our life. Most people don't change their name quite as often as I have, but I was born Heather Jean Allen a while ago. And then there was a fire, so I changed my name to Heather Lindsay Allen after a Scottish grandmother, Scottish great-grandmother in the Lindsay clan. Then I got married right around the internet came in, and I found out there were thousands of Heather Allens. Until then, I thought I was like unique. So then I changed my name, adopted my Dutch husband's name of Swarthout so that I stood out on the internet. Well, he exited the picture, and I didn't want to go back to all the Heather Allens, and by then there were more. So I took my Finnish grandmother's maiden name as my legal last name. And so my full name, because I wrote the book under Heather Lindsay Allen, my full name is Heather Lindsay Allen Hietala, but I go for Heather Hietala for normal use. So I grew up in New Hampshire in a small town. And when I've said in the past a small town, some people have a different impression of a small town than what it really was. So I put these pictures in. I did grow up at the end of a dirt road, but this is Wilmot Center, and that's sort of like Main Street. We got a Grange Hall, a library that was the one-room schoolhouse that my older sister went to in 3rd grade, and a church. And down at the Wilmot Flat, there'll be a post office, a community center that wasn't there when I was a child, and the town hall and volunteer fire department. And there's, after 56 years, there are 1,200 people in 29 square miles, just to give you an idea when I say it's a small town and it's rural. So one of the first things I can say that could be a Finnish aesthetic or connection is to nature. I grew up surrounded by nature. I grew up surrounded, immersed. It was a wood burning household. So we piled wood, we gardened, we hiked, we camped, so many things, but nature and long winters. Long winters. I was born in February, so my affinity for winter is just, I love winter. So here we are. I was, like Carrie said, I was in the foothills of the White Mountains. And I have to say, when my sister, I'll mention it again, and I went to Finland to visit relatives in 2014, the landscape, just like Houghton, Michigan, was so reminiscent of where I grew up. A northern, very, I don't know, just a landscape that I resonate with. And so there's the landscape of where I grew up. But New Hampshire is really nice because it's right near the coast, and it's So the coast of Maine, New Hampshire doesn't have much coastline, but the coast of Maine was very close, and we camped and sailed along the coast in the summer. So a big part of my heart is in the coast, and my Finnish grandmother was a part of that. Her name was Alma Hietala Allen. And in this picture, we have this, our boat it was an old wooden Hinkley, Soria, and it's moored to the dock or tied to the dock. And then Uncle Dan's boat is beside us, and my grandmother is above my brother in the orange life jacket to the left of the boat. But they would go camping. My grandparents would go camping with us and sailing with us. They loved the outdoors also. And again, she lived in Harrisville, New Hampshire. So all you weavers probably know Harrisville Designs. And so they lived in the oldest house in Harrisville, the Abby Twitchell house. So there's a connection there to weaving too. And Grammy was multidimensional. She was creative. And I have to say, my grandfather supported her creativity and supported her quote unquote Finnishness. He built her a sauna and a studio. And she was a painter. She did puppets. She did soft sculptural and dolls. She was cook. She just was creative. And so my older sister and I would go there for a week at a time in the summer, which we got an immersive, where she tried to teach us the cooking. And I have a copy that I use very much of the cookbook that was not her cookbook. My older sister got her cookbook, but it's a copy of her cookbook. So she tried to teach us the language. That didn't go over so well, but she taught us the cooking. She got a Finnish pen pal for Belinda, my older sister. And it was just the celebrations. There was a very Finnish element to my relationship with her. So this is a portrait she painted of me when I was pretty young, and it got decorated with Finnish flags in preparation for my trip to Hancock earlier this year. Some of the things that are still a part of me are the foods and the cooking. And I'm right now searching. I have this thing called alopecia and some other health issues. So I'm looking for a gluten-free nisu recipe, but that's a version of the nisu I used to make before I became gluten-free. And I'm in search of a gluten-free recipe. But the holidays and just definitely celebrations definitely have a Finnish or Nordic feel to them to this day in the way I celebrate them. In preparation for this workshop, I found in this journal, I was rereading this little sketchbook journal I had of my grandmother's, and she had a 1963. I had never looked at the date of when she had pasted into the journal. It was about keeping a diary, but it was from 1963 Women's Day issue. I was born in February 1963. So this was like the magazine, and this article came out right as I was being born. And so the way she kept journals, a combination of images and words, but not the sort of recording that my dad did, but more philosophizing and ruminating and stuff. And so I have a feeling that the way I keep my journal is actually more related to her than to my dad. So these are examples of my sketchbooks and journals, and you can see they're a combination of words and images. There's the textile series, and then sort of an evolution into using the journal. But you can sort of, or the journals in my life echo my creative evolution. Carrie mentioned I was in painting and sculpture as an undergrad. I switched to textiles in graduate school. And so the painting, that sense of space from sculpture, everything starts out as white fabric, and I do all the dyeing and surface design to create the colors that then create the sense of space. Pretty minimal, and I was thinking about the Finnish. I'm definitely not a German expressionist. You know, my work is often in a way sort of very quiet, sort of refined. I do bring in nature in the palette. The color palettes are always inspired by some sort of aspect of nature. And I grew up in nature where nature was surrounding and not with the urban grayness that can dull it. So my palette and sense of Mother Nature is very vibrant. And so the few things I've ever peopled my work with is leaves and birds over the years. And these are quite large, though the quilt is a queen size bed quilt on my left. And so it's, you can like walk into those doors. I love stitching. I love detail. I love something that reads from far away and up close. So this is, I also love old things, textiles. I layer and layer and layer, just like a life is layered, my work is layered. I went to Japan in high school for a year, lived with a family. I went back to study the language in college and lived with a family for a year. And so my relationship to the floor plane is quite different than the average American. And so when I was in grad school, I wanted to treat the floor like the wall and create a trap door, visual trap door, sort of like a painting on the floor, the way we put paintings on the wall. So my grandmother wove rag rugs, and so I chose, we also have a braided rug tradition, but I like the rag rugs and that surface, somehow that is what resonated me. So I got the textile ends from the textile industry in New Bedford, Mass, and wove, only weaving. I took a weekend workshop and I learned how to weave rag rugs. And so this is 2 large rugs that have been sewn together and then painted, and it's, I believe, like 10 feet by 8 feet or 10 feet by 9 feet. And your feet can walk on the yellow steps and then they get too big and as you go down. But it was just shifting, trying to think about different things with using the rag rug as a not super utilitarian, but from a different, not just stripes, but putting another idea on top of it. And so then I went and wrote this book. I went to a hand weaving guild in Minneapolis, Hand Weaving Guild of America conference in Minneapolis, and saw some amazing examples from Japan and Finland, and felt there should have been a book about all this great stuff. Couldn't find someone else to write it, so I ended up writing it. And so there's the Heather L. Allen. So that's the part I can't leave. So I can add names to it, but I can't get rid of that. And so I wrote that right as I was moving to Asheville, North Carolina. And then soon after that, another event that sort of influences me is I was asked by the Biltmore Estate to do a replication job, which means to make a facsimile or exact copy, not exactly of the techniques, but a replication of the original one. And so this is, these are 12 feet by 7 feet, and I painted 3.5 of them. And then they became the bed canopy and drapes for this. And this was working with textile ink. So it brought me into sort of textile inks as paint as a time when we had a drought in Asheville. And so it's pushed me into more textile inks so that I do not use the water that dyes do. And I was trying to emulate dyes with the textile inks in this process, in this project, I should say. And it's the Moreland Room in the Biltmore Estate. Around the same time, when I moved to Asheville, there was a fire in my family, and it sort of pulled the rug out from under me. I had moved to Tennessee in a little Chevette, which if anyone knows what a Chevette is, you can't fit much in it. So most of my stuff was in New Hampshire and thus in the fire. It was just stuff with a capital S. We all have stuff. My mom was not home that night. She was Scottish country dancing with my younger sister, and that's all that matters. And I'm forever grateful for that. It was also an old historic house, and that was very, very a tragic loss. But it really pulled the rug out from me. I didn't have any of my undergrad work. I didn't have my journal sketchbooks. I didn't have all the stuff that sort of makes you who you are. And so it flummoxed me. So the colors sort of receded. I started getting quieter and quieter. It was also at a time when some significant people began to pass away. And so that's when the birds came in, sort of to allude to spirit of the people that have crossed over. I love winter, and that there's a certain quietness to winter, so that the sort of I've had a little color come back, but the bright colors have never come back since then, actually. So this is again all the surface design, different paste resist to create this feeling. And so around that time, I'd been working in textiles for quite a while, making a living. And when my sister and I, we went through the ashes searching for something. And so we knew that there's a solid steel nutcracker. So we hunted through the ashes, and in a fire, everything is discombobulated. You don't know where anything is. So we found it. We did find it, I think, on the 3rd day. But in the course of that, I found my mom's steel recipe card box, and it changed my life. So, so I found it, and it was an old steel heavy duty one. And I lifted the lid, and when for one moment I saw the little pieces of paper held in space until the air movement dissolved them into ash. And it was just like all that history, all those words, all the recipes just poof, just gone. And I don't know, it was profound. The devastation was profound, but that moment was it put me on this course that it took quite a while for me to figure out how to process that, but it pushed me to something that was solid. So I began working in clay partly because it was solid. A lot of the clay it got too hot actually for clay, but you find fragments. It's not like textiles and paper where there is nothing left. I started working on wire, but I also wanted words that could survive a fire. So I started writing in the clay. And so this is one of the first pieces in that where I've written the clay and it's gone through a firing. And I grew up with canoes, sailboats, dinghies. I got into sea kayak as an adult. I was a weaver. I have boat shuttles. I'm a permaculture gardener, so I collect seed pods. So these shapes are one and all mixed together. This was also a time in my life, as I mentioned, significant people were starting to leave. And somehow the gravity that was like walking up and down the steps, it's all about gravity. It's about this weight. You're connected to the earth. You put that foot firmly on the ground. And yet somehow that fire like pulled the rug out from under me. That sense of gravity, that sense of concreteness, somehow something shifted. And so growing up on boats, there's this feeling when you're on a vessel that is totally different, much more mystical, much more freeing, not bound by gravity. And so I think there was a natural transition to something that was allowed to evoke a journey, but of much more spiritual or metaphysical one. So I continue to go back and forth between textiles and ceramics, trying to find how they talk to. One is 2D, one is 3D. Words again, that I can't stress enough how those journals are sort of, I got this personal library, and journals and sketchbooks are my reference material, my anchor, my companion, just such a big part of my creative process. And then all of a sudden, so I got the textile links in the first job. Now the Biltmore approached me again to replicate. And so this one gave me gilding and stitching. So there I am at the Biltmore Estate color matching. The original is beside me, quite faded. The other slide is of my 2 5-foot light tables. So I could tack down the fabrics, satins and comb cotton sateens and velvets that I had dyed, and tack them to a cartoon without drawing on the cartoon. And then I sewed it all together. So I spent 16 months sewing. And so you can see me sewing on the one hand, and then you see the back with all the stitches. I did 4 of these. And the thing that resonated with me the most was I held this little needle, one of the oldest tools, one of the most universal tools. And no matter how good I got at my stitches, I couldn't get faster. My stitches could get more exact, but they couldn't get faster. So every day when I threaded my needles, and I usually threaded a whole series, I felt like I was threading them with all the women and men in the world that were needling or sewing, that there was such a profound, I was listening to books on tape. I was in this, very advanced society, quote unquote. And yet my needle was the same as someone in an impoverished country. We were doing the same thing. We had the same tool of needle and thread. It was profound. And if you do that for months and months and months, it really seeps into your bones. So here are the pelmets in place at the Biltmore Estate. They're way up high. You need binoculars to see all my stitching and gilding, but they really do glow in the lighting. So then I go back to my clay, and there are the words inside. And now I'm trying to figure out how to get the stitching. And so in painting, you use a lot of illusion. So here I am creating the illusion of stitching and fabrics. So I'm going back and forth. So here's a textile. I'm sort of chronologically in this talk. So this is about sort of the vibrations and the sort of chakra, whatever you want to call it, the vibration a person has. We all have a different vibration. And I can't evoke that in the ceramic and the 2D work. I mean, the 3D work, but I can say it in cloth. I can say it in 3D. So the 2D and the 3D allow me to say different things. And you can see all the stitching, machine and hand stitching that is in this piece. And there's all those words that they're anchored in. So words. So here's a little glimpse into my house. So I have a big blackboard that I just painted it on the wall that I write on all the time. And I've written on cars, I've written on walls. And so here's a wall that I painted and then scratched in. There's my ice skates that are written all over. I like the act of writing. I like what writing evokes. It evokes sort of people in the human experience, but it doesn't have to be exact. So that's just a little insight into my writing. And so around this time, my grandmother, my Finnish grandmother, when I went to Japan to study in college, I came back and she had been sort of absorbed into Alzheimer's. So I never knew her after I was about 20, which was a real travesty and a real sad event. And then years later, my dad got Alzheimer's also. And so this was a series. I started writing more and more on these porcelain vessels, and I would wipe some of the words away. And it was he had a little book he always was trying to write down and hold on to his thoughts that then he could go back and reference, trying to remember what he needed to remember or find what he needed to remember. And so this also is when I began using more and more glass to represent the human spirit. Because if you look in someone's eyes, they're alive and they sparkle and there's so much there. And even when someone has Alzheimer's, it's the same eye, they're still in there somewhere, even if they don't know you. So that was a really big influence of me using upcycled glass. It also, as you age and you have more and more life experiences, that idea of cycles. Day and night is a cycle, a month is a cycle, a year is a cycle, a lifetime is a cycle. The tides are run by influenced by the moon, and that sort of whatever, I don't know. This piece is called Lunar Transition, but it's about cycles. And I did one quite a while ago, and it was all just black and white. This is another rendition where I felt like I wanted the sun and the moon to somehow dialogue. So here the sun is inside the moon, or that golden essence of somehow like that inner light. But again, transition cycles. And so here's the wall behind me, but I put this on here because this is a piece that I'll show 2 panels that are finished, but the mascot of my studio is in back of me, and that is a watercolor by my grandmother. And I just feel like it just hangs out there of the ocean, the dunes, and it's been there since I inherited it. And so I've been in this house 14 years, so I've never moved. Things get moved around it, but it never moves. It's like the mascot of my studio. And so down below are all these collage fabrics and sort of that idea of the ocean below the vessel as our subconscious, our history, our ancestry, all of that. And so these are 2 of the finished panels. And so there's one gilded vessel. That was that influence of that Biltmore project, gilded. And then all these vessels sort of in the blues are sort of our subconscious, our ancestors, our ideas, all those sorts of things that make us up who we are. So then, okay, so I took this name, and so it means place of sand. And okay, here it goes. I got this tingling sensation, and it's been happening for 14 years. I don't know if it'll ever stop. But when my uncle told me what it meant, it was like, oh my God, this is a name I was always supposed to have. In the room over here, I have shelves of sand. I mean, I have shelves, and some people have little bottles they collect sand in. I got soda bottles. I got mayonnaise jars. I got a lot of sand, and not just sand, but like lots of sand. And so here's Kalajoki, Finland, on the western coast. When I decided I was going to go and visit my relatives, my sister, who is we're playing Molki on the beach there. She's in the white, and then a cousin and her daughter and me are all over to the side. But this is sort of that area where my family is from, or the relatives are from, and where the sand is. And I have to say, in all my sand collections, this is some of the best sand. It is the most colorful. It takes the cake. And so if I have to be named for a place of sand, I'm glad I like the sand. So that was a real pivotal trip. It was pivotal for me also because I knew some of the geography and stuff, but I did not expect to find Heather in Finland. So I got to connect with Heather, and I was named for the Scottish Heather and the place of sand. So it was a very profound, for someone who is into that kind of stuff, it was a very profound experience. And also just to be in a place that felt so much like home, and the relatives, it was just a magical experience. And I hope to go back. But here we are playing on the beach. So then I come back and I continue my work. And so here are those vessels again. They've evolved. The textile surfaces are more apparent. I've now found these welding rods that allow me to stitch and mend the clay as I work with it. I don't have to fix all the cracks. I can reinforce with stitching, because the welding rods will go to cone 11 through the wood firing process. So the words, all this is very therapeutic, but it's also taken on a life of its own. And many people, when they come into my booth, I used to do a lot of the craft shows and things, they often saw a Japanese or a Scandinavian aesthetic to my work. So here's one. I'm starting to work with a little of that, maybe who knows how many decades later, that Biltmore project that had all the curvilinear lines that everybody thought was going to influence me right away. I don't know if this is seaweed or a vine, but it's a new fabric I found, and I just love the energy of it. This is a more recent piece called Flow, and I make these small, different size of these small vessels, and it's sort of a piece to me that represents humanity, that we're all in this life together, all flowing along. We're all separate together. As I've aged and my mother's aged, I started doing these little vessels that are tandem. So there's the nurturing, this connection, but it's all that we're all unique, all different, but all unique, and all the way I wish the way the world would be. So this is a new series I've started to finally put those vessels on the wall. And this is I just did another one in this. This is going to be an ongoing series about continuing that idea that we're physically here, but then our shadows, like you can't touch a shadow touches you. And a shadow is sort of like those birds. They're sort of like the essence of something, but they're light, sort of like that sparkle of glass that you see in someone's eyes. And so these pieces are actually built for the shadows. And it's called the space between the way certain times it can be lit. Like this is lit from one side. If you light it from both sides, it's very hard to see what the vessels are. So I didn't put that slide in, but all the shadows talk to each other and they interweave. And it's sort of like the spirit world to me. So this is a series, and they're wire, like that class I taught up there of wire and bamboo and mixed media. And then I also do these vessels that are sort of have a personality, sort of they're lifted, elevated. And these last couple of years, I've been putting these little vessels on, I think a lot to do with my mom. My mom passed away a year ago, and that sense of nurturing, but it also can be the inner child that we have inside that sometimes needs to come out. It can talk about a lot of things. I have a bird bath outside, and I'm very aware of all the little birdies too. So who knows what it is. And then my most recent series is sort of harking back to some of the textiles. So there's a textile surface. So these are painted on panels, again, alluding to sort of winter. You know, I'm not sure if I'm in winter yet. I'm definitely in the fall season of my life. I could be heading into winter. But there's a sense of quietness of winter. There's a sense of this, I don't know. So this palette is foggy. It's winter. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's about this, these vessels can talk to themselves. Are they heading to a new realm, or I'm not quite sure, but they fascinate me. And I've been thinking about these for quite a while. And so that's all for today, folks. And I canoe every morning. This is not me because I have hair in this, and I'm usually in the stern, but I canoe every morning with a friend of mine on a local lake here. And it's a big part of my creative process because it keeps me on the water, and who knows where I'm going, but it's an adventure. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. I think the amazing thing about what you just showed us, this presentation, is we saw just a tiny little blip of your creative process here. We saw your textiles, but I feel that this slide discussion really showed us the breadth of your expression, and it's really inspiring. And so Heather had a one-person exhibit here of all her textile work through time. And but then she also did 2 workshops. She did a workshop in embroidery, and she did a workshop in using metal textile techniques with metal wire. Yeah, and Heather, you'll be glad to know that a lot of those pieces that your students made are currently on exhibit in the gallery in our folk school at Midsummer exhibit. So, but the students went beyond what they learned in your class. I have some incredible sculptures, and you're right, the shadows that they create are incredible. But the thing that was so really wonderful when Heather was here was that I could tell that she was really connecting with the Finnish-American community here. We We invited her to come at the same time that the board was here for their annual meeting. So we had at her exhibit over 100 people, including people from all over the country, and then our Hancock crew, who are real art lovers. And I could see the sparks going in Heather's mind. I could see her excitement and her feeling of connection. So I was curious, Heather, what you took away from that experience here, being surrounded by people who had the similar values and upbringing and Finnish-American ideas.
I would just say it was, especially with just losing my mother, when you lose your mother and you become an orphan, there's a sense of unrootedness that I hadn't really ever felt before. And so going there, I felt like rerooted in a certain way. The mother that passed, she had a Scottish background, but her grandmother wasn't whatever. Often you can have someone that's here and they can either be proud of their heritage or they don't really care about their heritage. And Grammy, my grandmother, her sisters weren't as whatever. They were definitely proud, but Grammy was proud and wanted to pass it on. And so I felt like there was a lot of loss when Grammy died, or she didn't die actually for quite a while, but she went into Alzheimer's. That part sort of went away. But doing this talk, I realized that a lot of who I am, my aesthetic, and the sort of what I thought was Shaker, like I grew up in a very quote unquote, I thought Shaker house, actually was more of a Scandinavian house. And that was Grammy's influence on my mother and my dad. And so being there, it just, I think, made me look at, and this talk also, making look at who you are and what makes you who you are. And so Japan and Finland are the two biggest influences. And when Belinda and I were in Finland, there was such a feeling like when I was in Hancock of just being at home.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know quite how you say it. Like you feel like you're home, or you like I can go to Italy, but I can love Italy, but it's not like I'm at home.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can go somewhere and I love it, but it's not like feeling that, I don't know quite how to say it, that feeling of connection. Yeah, I don't know any other way to say it. And so I think that, like, I would like now to go back to Finland on a residency. I definitely want to feel there's when Belinda and I went, we reconnected to cousins. A lot of them do not have a whole lot of English that's our age, but there's some of the younger ones. And I am in regular email contact with one of my cousin's nieces. I'm not quite sure, cousin removed, whatever. And so it's there's definitely an ongoing connection to that part of me. And just being there in Hancock, I've met a couple of the board members. One lives near an aunt and uncle outside Philly, and I'd met him at the Philly show before. There's a connection there now. I know where he resides. And another one is up in Thomaston, Maine, right near where the Finnish little cultural center that I stop in when I'm on the St. George Peninsula. So I think it just reinforced that part of me in a deeper way.
I could tell that. So I think it's wonderful to be given that gift at any time in life, but certainly as you get older, I feel like what a gift to recognize parts of yourself in a different way. So the other thing you did while you were here is Heather we got a local art teacher to bring 35 high school students into the gallery. And Heather talked to them in the gallery about her life and her work. And then they met with the Finnish-American folk school director, and we did a hand-spun wool project where they hand-spun their own wool and took it back and made weavings. And one of the weavings is actually in the gallery right now in the show. So that was a wonderful experience. But what I was really amazed at with Heather is how she opened her life and herself up to these high school students in a way that I don't see many people do. You were very open and vulnerable. You shared information about alopecia. You shared information about your growing up. It was all, I think it brought those students in a way that was really unique for them. So I was kind of curious, Is that something you do regularly? Like, do you open yourself like that and tell the stories of your life to shed light on your artwork? Or do you think those stories are important in viewing your artwork to know? Or was that just a moment where you shared something special with those students?
Mhm. Well, it was, in hindsight, that was another pivotal moment in my life. Because I'm sitting here with, I thought I was going to wear a wig today. Some people for their, if you see me in a magazine, I might be wearing a wig, or I might be wearing a hat, or all these different things. But when I talk to the kids, and when I talk to kids, I often talk about alopecia. And I have to say, when I developed alopecia universalis 8 years ago, I hid. I just hid. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to deal with it. I had to deal with being cold all the time. But not saying your hair is your identity, but I also didn't have eyelashes. A few of those have come back. But so it was all this logistics of how to deal with a total hairless body. But I didn't know who I was. So I hid. I stopped sort of doing things. Um, but then when I gave one of the talks in the last years, right before I gave a talk, there was a 12-year-old girl that had committed suicide because she had alopecia universalis and was bullied so much. And so I put my hat back on, but I took it off and just said a little something about this wonderful foundation, Alopecia Foundation National, and this program they have for school systems to help schools deal with a kid if they have it, so they don't do the bullying. So whenever I have kids, I like to bring that up, or I like to share sometimes things that, because sometimes when you're a kid, you feel like nobody's, I don't know, somehow, I'm not quite sure what, but if you can, and I can't talk to them one on one, but if I can share who I am, one, they will get a sense that I'm just another person. And so that then if I'm just another person, they will hear what I'm saying in a very different way. And so, and the gift, I'm going to follow up on this, but the gift that Finlandia and all you guys gave me was you posted that where I didn't put my hat back on it because it was so hot in the gallery. I have never allowed a picture like that out. And when I first saw it posted, I was petrified. I tried to figure out how to take it down. No, but then what I realized was I couldn't, and I didn't know quite what to do with it. And then I realized it was a whole sense of relief that I'd been hiding for 8 years. And so now it's sort of like I came out of the closet.
Mhm.
And so like today, I was going to wear the wig, but it's too hot. It is hot. And so, but before I might have worn the wig just because I didn't want to look like this. And so I think you posting that post gave me a gift
Mm.
of I'm out of the closet, and this is just enough. I wear a hat when I need it, but if it's hot, this is how I'll be. I'm not quite sure. There's some places that I still wouldn't go out like this, but it's a step. But when I talk to those kids about some of the things that had happened to me, and it's not just ideas. Like you can have sometimes you can talk about art speak and it's all ideas, but they're young. Who knows where they'll be? If I tell them sort of a honest sort of progression of things that have happened to me and shifted my direction, that it wasn't straight, all these things happen and have caused me to respond in certain ways, then maybe they know that they don't have to have all the answers at once. Because sometimes you feel like, I mean, when you're young, it's a I mean, I'm talking from a different perspective, but I'm trying to give them another story
It,
that
it
maybe
actually it was really beautiful, Heather. It was like a really beautiful moment, I thought. And I was really in awe of you
oh, thank
talking
you.
to those students. And I could tell they were like connected and
Oh,
engaged in a really meaningful way. So
they were. They were. And I think it basically trying to tell them that the journey they're on is not straight.
mhm.
You know, who knows what'll happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great thing to hear at that age,
Mhm,
especially in this day of like Instagram where they're all trying to be so perfect.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
I really appreciated all that. So it was
Oh,
beautiful.
thank you. It was a great bunch. It was a great bunch.
It was. I mean, 35 of them in the theater, spinning wool,
Oh,
boys, girls, everybody, it was just
mhm,
amazing. It was really
mhm,
special.
mhm.
So, let's see, how much time do we have left? We have about 14 minutes left. So, if anybody has questions, they can start putting them in the chat. But we can keep talking for a little bit and see if we get some questions. You can put it either in the Q&A or chat. So one thing we saw today so much is your experimentation and your really playful attitude towards materials. Because I'm not sure if everybody realized that the rugs that you wove were actually woven all in white fabric, and then they were painted. So that's like a new take. That's a Heather take on rag rugs, right? So how did you get these ideas about experimenting with media? Is that something that's like, were you taught that? Was that just natural?
Well, I think some of it is like I alluded to Grammy. Grammy was a painter, but she worked with puppets. She worked with all kinds of things. I had this other this sculptor, Winslow Eves, that I apprenticed with in high school, and he did bronze carving, stone carving, all kinds of things. And so I think, probably experiences, in Japan, and then when I went as in high school, in college, I took 6 months off and went through Asia, backpacked through Europe for, 7 or 8 months. So I've been exposed to lots of things, but I think a lot of it, I have to say, is those journals. Is that in the journals, often it's something, I get a forecast of something in the journals. And if it's in the journals and something resonates me, and I have to say I'm quiet, I am an introvert, that could be a very Finnish gene. I work in quiet. And so it helps me listen to things. And so I listen, if there is an urge, I will take a little time and I will do a little sketch, a little study, a little sample, and it may not go anywhere for a decade or more. But I have things hung. I mean, I have all these things all over that I can't put away because there's something that resonates with them. And who knows when that idea will be something that resonates with something else. And so I think that's just part of my personality. In undergrad, I did printmaking and sculpture and painting. They tried to put me in a box. I didn't fit. I went to grad school. They said I couldn't double. Now you can do multimedia, but back then you couldn't. So they put me in a box. So I got into textiles. But even in textiles, I did scarves, and that's about as far I did with the wearables. But I did the scarves, I did the weaving, I did the surface, I did things on the floor, I did things on the wall. I'm sort of more, it's the ideas that hold my work together, not the materials. So if I need to learn something to fulfill an idea, then like I got into the wood firing because of an idea. I wanted words to survive, so it's, I got into textile actually because I wanted to wear my images. I wanted them to dissolve and fold in a way that paintings don't. So I think it's pursuing an idea.
Great. So we have a question from our audience. All right. Someone asked, do you use any Finnish indigenous aspects in your art? And they just thank you and said, very interesting.
So I'm not sure what she would mean by that. Finnish indigenous.
Well, I think some of your images, I guess probably like some of the indigenous Finnish Sami cultures, or any connection that you have to any of those?
Well, the biggest thing I would say is, okay, the rag weaving is definitely a connection. My approach to it isn't, but my approach is still based on so much of my color is all based on the natural world, sort of like vibrant, like Mary Meckle, but still that sort of aspect. Now I'd say maybe I'm working much more with the natural materials of the material itself. And so that might be, the Finns are very, they use a lot of the natural materials. And so I'd say the era of my creativity right now, I would say, is I always used natural fabrics, all cottons and linens and silks, but I did use MX dyes. But now I'm using much more natural materials. I guess.
Great.
I hope that answers it.
Great. I don't see any other questions. So let me just, well, I do want to say, and I hope you have a chance to read some of the chat that's been going on, because I think people have really connected at a really deep level about connecting with your Finnish-American ancestry. A lot of people have experienced this in different ways, and they've shared some of their experiences on the chat. So I hope you can have a chance to read some of those. But I guess, like, unless we have any other questions, I would just say that your work has that feel of Finnish America, but it also has a real universal themes about human life and humanity, things that we all experience with grief and loss, journeys. Is there anything special you want to say about that the reason that you're looking at these universals, is that something you've always been interested in, or is there something about your upbringing that informs the way you chose your subject for art?
Well, I would say probably, I don't think I chose it. It chose me. But I would say there's a certain non-specificness to it.
Mhm.
But I also think that, okay, so I grew up in New Hampshire. When I was 7, my crazy parents took a Volkswagen bus and 4 kids and drove from New Hampshire to Mount McKinley, all the way across and back. We had to get out of school early. So that just exposed me to all kinds of landscapes, all kinds of places that were so different from where I grew up. And that was, I was 7. And I think that prompted me to travel
Mhm.
and to be exposed to different ideas. And so when I'm working on something, it's not, the core is some experience or something that I'm trying to express, and I process my life through my art, but it's not meant to be specific to me.
Mhm.
It gets filtered through all this stuff so that it becomes something that they can resonate with, hopefully with something maybe that I imbued it with, or they bring their own story to it. So there is something that is, it's not, I don't know, it's trying to say something that I hope is relevant, but not specific,
Mhm.
if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I think that comes through very much in your work. There's another question in the question and answer. What does the Finnish concept of sisu mean to you? You clearly represent it in many ways.
Oh, I have a potholder sisu and I have a magnet sisu. Um, well, I'd say that I've had a great life. My mom says probably I'm the kid that she worried the most about. Um, but I'd say sisu, there's this, it's a strength, it's a quietness, resilience, a belief, and I would say a connection to something. But to me, I'd say it's a connection, but it's also a connection to the earth. There is a strength in the earth and nature that permeates who I am, permeates the Finnish culture. That's so I'd say that the sisu is specific to us, but it also is a tree and the tree roots. But it's that sort of fortitude, strength. It's you can't. It's sort of invisible, but it's there. And I would say if I look back at certain things that I've had to deal with in my life, there's been a lot of sisu that
Mhm.
has risen to the surface.
And someone mentioned, well, you're a real gardener, and they talked about how the garden and the roots in the garden inform you. So that you mentioned that a little as you were talking about that, but
Mhm.
one.
And I think of cross pollination that happens with all my different techniques and materials. But this fits this. There's also the thing that is sort of in my subconscious and my intuition and all that. And that's how the roots talk to each other. And that's not like there's cross pollination that happens visually in my studio as and the stuff that's on the wall jumps and I see this and then I put that together. But there's also all this other stuff that is like all that stuff that is in my subconscious that cross pollinates, like tree roots talk to each other.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I learned even more about you today, even after I spent the week with you talking. We had a lot of great chats and a lot of good times. But it's been really a wonderful time together here. I appreciate you coming back and keep continuing to share with Finlandia Foundation all your wonderful insights into how to live a good life.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Well, I have to thank them and you for the opportunity to go up there and sort of feel reconnected to all of this. And
Mm.
to sort of this talk was really interesting because I have given lots of arts talks, but not quite from this perspective. And the perspective, not so much what your art is about, but who you are and
Mhm.
how that who you are as a person, you know, how that comes in. So this was a very interesting talk for me too. And I want to thank everybody for coming and also for you and Tommy and everybody who made it happen.
Great. Well, thank you, folks. This will be posted on YouTube, so you can join us, join it and share it with your friends later. And thank you, Heather.
Thank you.